Got to pay special attention this time. You could hear sirens and see the Mounties galloping in to arrest everybody concerned, because Ann Coulter is on the Michael Coren show. Now look, you don't have to agree with her, for goodness sake. It's not about agreement or disagreement. It's about being grown up and adult and tolerating freedom of speech. Tolerating, embracing it, loving it. Even now there are people, academics included, who are saying she shouldn't be allowed to speak at certain universities. The right to speak your mind is pretty fundamental. People may attack it, but it's not going to die. Not on my watch. Michael Coren Show. Hello, welcome. Michael Coren Show, and golly, I bet there are a lot of people watching this one. It's because of me, I know, and my charm and charisma. Ann Coulter on the show, exclusive one-hour interview with someone who many believe should not be allowed into Canada. We value our freedom, our liberty so very much in this country. Certain people shouldn't be allowed in. Well, she's here, and she's speaking at various universities, and welcome to you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Is it really, though? Is it?
Yes, it is. Though I was hoping more for a fruit basket and not a threat to criminally prosecute. Oh, well, welcome to Canada.
Well, let's talk about that, because one of the vice presidents at the University of Ottawa, one of the three universities where you're speaking, wrote to you before you'd set foot in Canada and effectively threatened, we could say warned, but I would say really threatened implicitly, that if you say anything a bit too controversial, you'll be charged with a criminal offence.
Yes, yes. So I am Ann Coulter, a victim of a hate crime. I didn't realize what the detail, how liberal the law is on what constitutes a hate crime, but having read his description of it, I realized that letter constitutes a hate crime against me, because what he is doing here is assuming that I have some sort of proclivity to commit crimes. He's put it in writing. Why is he doing that? Because I'm part of an identifiable group, conservatives. Does he send that letter to everyone? Because I'm going to file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission and have them investigate, because unless every speaker at the university gets that letter, he is engaging in very, not only offensive speech, because of an identifiable group I belong to, conservatives, he's actually putting me at risk of violence. I speak on college campuses all the time, and I am constantly attacked violently. I travel with a bodyguard. Does the provost travel with a bodyguard? I don't think so. No, that letter is putting me at risk of violence, besides creating hatred toward me on the basis of what? On the basis of my belonging to an identifiable group. I am a conservative. If this law means anything, he has committed a hate crime against me.
Let's give him some publicity. I think he deserves it. Francois Hull is his name. He's Vice President, Academic and Provost, University of Ottawa, publicly funded. This letter was sent out on Sunday evening, I believe. It went on to the various blogs, including mine, and many people were commenting on it. Of course, those people who support Ann Coulter saying it's awful, but this is what I found very interesting. Many people who disagree with us saying this is dreadful. How can you threaten someone, and there is an implicit threat of criminal prosecution if you offend someone?
And by the way, he has no idea what my speech is about. This is for a speech I haven't given yet. I've given no hint of, oh, it's about political correctness. That's it. He just thinks that conservatives, when they open their mouths, they are going to offend. Well, that is an offensive statement itself. And by the way, it also throws down the gauntlet, because now if I don't get arrested, I'm kind of a wuss.
You won't be arrested. I can guarantee you this guy has now been told, why did you do that? Don't you dare go near this person. Don't arrest. It would look so bad.
Well, you seem awfully confident about that. I don't know that Mark Stein would be that confident. They went after him. They went after Ezra Levant, who's introducing me. I'm new to this country, but you seem a little more confident about this than I am. I only request that if they do arrest me, please send those Canadian Royal Mounted Police, because they are so cool.
They don't always wear that uniform, and the horses have been retired largely.
Couldn't I be arrested on a horse?
By the end of the show, I'm sure that may happen. There's a context to this person's letter, because 2 weeks ago we had Israel Apartheid Week. Now, I personally believe, I find that completely oxymoronic and dumb, but they have a right to do it. But we had Israel Apartheid Week. We've had Christians called bigoted, homophobic loons. Pro-lifers have been threatened. Jewish kids frightened of identifying themselves. All of this within Canadian universities.
Right.
But you've been told if you say anything offensive, it could result in a criminal prosecution. Rather inconsistent.
Not only inconsistent, but as I say, ironically, accusing me of having criminal proclivities in a letter that had to be sent to the sponsors, to my host, to the Claire Booth Luce Institute. There are a dozen people who read that letter before it gets to me, accusing me of having criminal proclivities for a speech I haven't delivered yet. There's been no hint of what I'm going to say, other than that it's generally a speech on political correctness.
Now, why do you think this person would assume you will be controversial? Are you a controversial person?
No, and by the way, I wanted to take issue with your introduction that you don't have to agree with Ann Coulter. Yes, you do. What do I say that anyone wouldn't agree with? Let's take it point by point, because if you don't agree, you're going to.
Healthcare reform, I rather support it. Let's not get on to that. But no, the point being that...
So do I, but I have a different kind of a reform.
In any civilized society, freedom of expression, disagreeing with what we do on this show, the idea that one side of opinion, one side of the spectrum should be silenced, is incredibly offensive. And of course, if the right had the power, how would the left react if we told the left, you can't say anything anymore?
Yeah, no, we wouldn't. We love to hear them talk. There's nothing funnier. Please, talk.
I want to talk about being controversial because I'm not in your league, but I hear this said about me sometimes, and I say, well, controversial according to whom? You mean you disagree with me, but in what way am I controversial?
That is exactly right. You have phrased it exactly right. Controversial means you're a conservative. That's what it means.
Have you ever been provocative for its own sake?
I hope in everything I say. I mean, what are you doing if you're a speaker or a writer and you're in the world of ideas trying to persuade people of something? Yes, you are trying to provoke people to think. If I'm just saying, I don't know, the sun rises in the east, that's maybe true, but it's not particularly interesting. Of course you are provoking thought. That is what a polemicist is. So I would hope everything I say is provocative in that sense.
Ever said anything that a month later, a week later, even a moment later, you thought, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way?
Yeah, I said something nice about a Democrat once. And I realized, oh, that was a mistake. Probably, well, just recently, Bart Stupak, which I'm sure that is very inside politics for Canada.
Oh, it really is. No idea. You have no idea what you're talking about.
A big issue in America, I don't really know what Canadians' position is, but is abortion. And there are a lot of, the Republican Party is the party of life, the Democrat Party is the party that wants to stick forks in babies' heads, and every once in a while a Democrat will come forward claiming to be one of the elusive, it's like a unicorn, the pro-life Democrat. Well, we found out about those pro-life Democrats on the health care vote. The health care bill passed by Congress, and I guess tomorrow being signed into law by Obama until it's overturned by the massive Republican Congress we get next year. It subsidizes abortion. So taxpayers who think this is murder, because, oh, it is murder, that's right, they will be forced to have their money used to kill babies. It's now up to more than 40 million babies have been killed in America, sleeping peacefully in their mother's womb, and all these pro-life Democrats voted for that bill. So the myth of the pro-life Democrat, I think, has been busted by the vote last night.
Let's talk about the abortion issue. I think we probably agree with each other. I certainly have taken a lot of flack for being pro-life. In Canada, you can support any number of wars. You can say close down hospitals, whatever, but if you say life begins at conception, you're worse than Hitler. And that's pretty much how we...
Talk about ironic.
Isn't it just...
we will define human beings who can be slaughtered in the womb, and they're the ones who are calling the people who want to protect humans a Nazi. That is too Orwellian for me. My head is exploding.
Talk about Canada for a while. There are Canadians who think you've been terribly harsh on this great country. The notion of America tolerating our existence and maybe one morning waking up and rolling over and smothering Canada. We're a great, free, autonomous nation.
I was cross with Canada at the moment. I looked up the transcript. I forget the details at the time, and I may post it on my webpage, AnnCoulter.com, because it is a hilarious transcript. It was on Hannity and Combs, and it was when Canada, I believe, was objecting vociferously and a little snippily to the war in Iraq and various other of America's anti-terrorism policies. As I've said many times, including in that transcript, the Canadians are either very good or very bad, and they have often been America's friend and an important friend. But after 3,000 Americans were slaughtered on U.S. territory, when our president, who had just been reelected, by the way, in a democracy, you can't say, oh, we're just condemning Bush, not America. No, American voters had just reelected him. It was right after the 2004 election, to be caterwauling, and especially with the rest of the world, complaining about our anti-terrorism policies in response to 3,000 Americans being slaughtered on American soil. Yes, I was a little cross with Canada at the moment.
But Canadians, of course, are fighting and dying in Afghanistan.
Yes.
We have a Conservative government now. There'll always be some Canadian who will condemn something the Americans do,
yes,
unless
it was
it's
not
Barack
the same
Obama.
Canada then. At this point, it might be Conservatives crossing the border from America into Canada.
So
and even France. Who knew? What a world.
No, that's not going to happen. I just knocked the top of my pen. I was so shocked when you said even France. So you're not a Canada hater. You realize how wonderful we are up here, apart from our human rights.
No, Americans love Canada. One of our presidents, Bill Clinton, served here during Vietnam.
Oh, that's very good. I wonder how many complaints there'll be after this show. You mentioned...
Just send the Mounties.
You referred to certain countries, how we should occupy, forcibly convert to Christianity. If indeed you said this, because I know that misquotations that take place.
No forcibly involved.
What did you say?
What got inserted, and I was just telling you off camera, there are a lot of media requests while I'm up here, and the one sort of insistence I have is that it be live TV because of, I mean, this used to be very big in the United States where they'd interview you, 60 Minutes was famous for its ambush interviews. They'd interview someone for an hour, then pull 20 seconds of quotes. Well, they can change the question for what's being answered. I mean, they were just, it was just shockingly deceptive. And of course, when you talk to a reporter on the phone or sitting down at lunch, they can make up anything. If they were in your presence or if they were on the phone with you, they can say anything. Live TV, I'm a lot happier with the results. It's hard to screw that up. But as for the forcible conversion, no, of course I never said that. It was my famous 9/11 column. It was written the night of the attack on the United States. I was in New York. In fact, I was stuck in Queens. You couldn't get back into Manhattan. And at the end of the column, writing about the attack that had just occurred on my country and to my fellow countrymen, the final point was, we're not at war with the country. We're at war with all of the people singing and dancing in the streets right now. I don't know if you remember that, but there were photos not only within the United States, or not only, you know, in barbaric foreign lands, but also within the United States, of people cheering at the slaughter of 3,000 Americans. And I said, the idea is this is much bigger than a single country. This is not Japan flying in with Japanese airplanes and the Japanese flag on the airplane where we can go to war with the country. I said, we are at war with all these fanatics and we should invade their countries, kill their leaders, and convert them to Christianity. It's interesting that forcibly just kept getting slipped in the restatements of that. But, you know, if what I said was the same, then, you know, go with what I said. How about that? You know, they always do this. Well, I paraphrase, but that's kind of what you said. Well, if you're paraphrasing, go with what I said. Because, I mean, I think this is just a testament to the pathetic public school education. That is precisely what we did after World War II and after the Korean War. So don't get pissy with me. Get pissy with FDR, I guess. After Japan, MacArthur put out a call for Christian missionaries. The emperor said to MacArthur, okay, we're ready, convert us. And MacArthur said, well, we don't really do it that way. But he put out a call for Christian missionaries to come to Japan, and they poured in. And they are still operating there today. It didn't take very much in Japan, but Japan does have a lot of religious freedom. Same thing after the Korean War. It's not done at the end of a gun, but it's done. Christian missionaries poured into South Korea, and by the way, go look at in any American college yearbook at the Campus Christian Society, half of them are Koreans.
Some people would argue, you know, that Iraqi Christians suffer far more now since the war than they did under Saddam Hussein. That some of the most radical people in the Palestinian resistance movement are Christian. That there are many Christians in Syria who support the Assad regime.
Well, Christians throughout history, and I mean, nobody would deny that a lot of Christians have done bad things. That's the thing about original sin.
But I'm saying it doesn't guarantee being pro-Western, being Christian.
It generally guarantees a much higher level of freedom, of fairness, of a democracy. I admit this may be more foreign to a Canadian viewer than it ought to be to an American viewer, but I mean, America is a country that was founded by Christians. That is a fact. And liberals can be pouty about it, but that is a fact. Maybe, you know, it could have been founded by Buddhists, but it wasn't. And it was because of the Christian concepts of no man being above another man. We're all equal before God. That is what leads to the American Revolution, that you can't have a king, you can't have royalty. That is the whole point of the Declaration of Independence. That is the whole point of the Constitution. And that is what has led to the freedom and prosperity of the United States of America up until last night's health care vote.
You're almost completely right. Back in a few moments on The Michael Coren Show. We'll see you very soon. Welcome back, Michael Coren Show. Ann Coulter, exclusive interview with her while she is in Canada, giving 3 lectures at Canadian universities. Already there are protests taking place, of course, and that's a good thing. People should be involved. Refusing to put up posters, not such a good thing, but worst of all, a vice president at the University of Ottawa, hello, I know you're watching, who sent out a letter before Anne had arrived in Canada, warning her not to be too offensive. And it doesn't mean offensive, it means don't say too many things we might object to. That's what it comes down to, saying things that people object to.
Not saying things that people object to, saying things that liberals object to.
They are people, you know.
Because that letter said things that I object to. So we'll see how the Human Rights Commission deals with it, because that's a hate crime, according to how he described the hate crime laws in this country.
There are conservatives, though, who... And I bet in about 15 seconds you're going to make fun of them. There are conservatives who say, oh, Ann Coulter, she goes too far.
Well, like what? Let's take it issue by issue.
Oh, I mentioned what you said about Tiller and the killing of him.
And I think I demonstrated that it was a devastating point.
What you said about some of the widows after 9/11.
Also devastating. And by the way, do you get Fox News up here?
Of course we do.
Oh,
we have to pay for it, but
we don't get it in our hotel room, and I'm crossed about that, too.
Well.
I'm going to start threatening to roll over and crush Canada again if I don't get Fox News.
You can get Fox News. It's one of those digital ones you have to actually, unlike us, we're on basic cable, you have to buy the thing. But Al Jazeera is available as well, so it's all okay.
Okay, sorry, you just made my head explode again, and I forgot what I was even talking about. Oh, yeah, okay, so on Fox News,
yeah.
Bill O'Reilly, the most popular, I would say cable host, but he's brushing up against, he's beating every cable show. Massive ratings. Anyway, when Guilty, or rather Godless came out with the attack on the Jersey Girls, which I'll explain in a moment, every night of his show, he would attack me saying, he was one of those conservatives, she goes too far. And then at the end of the week, after bashing me, and I boycotted his show for a week because he was being so mean to me. He took, you know, one of his Bill O'Reilly polls for his own viewers, and they're tuning in, presumably because they like him. Did Ann Coulter go too far in attacking the Jersey Girls? And I started running into him around Fox News. I said, hey, you ever going to run the results of those polls, or this is like one of these South American elections? You wait till you get the result you want before we get to hear the answer. He finally ran them, and something like 90% of his own viewers, after weeks of him bashing me, agreed with me. If you read what I actually said, as opposed to what it was said I said, I think it was a pretty devastating point once again. I mean, the point, it was, in a nutshell, the point of my most recent book, Guilty, that liberals use victimhood in order to attack. And they send out these weeping widows, and they were not 9/11 widows. They were 4 widows, called themselves the Jersey Girls, to go out, cut campaign commercials for John Kerry, to oppose the Iraq War, to promote policies that, gosh, a lot of people who were upset about the attack on 9/11 were supporting. And after my attack on the Jersey Girls, by the way, my biggest fan base came from other 9/11 widows who couldn't stand these harpies who were going out, A, claiming to speak for all the widows, B, using their victimhood status to prevent anyone from arguing back. Well, I burst that bubble. And in fact, the reaction to my attack on them using their victimhood status, look, I don't care if people want to talk about something, a personal interest story about how they've been victimized by whatever, crime, the 9/11 attack, whatever. But don't use that as a shield to prevent people from arguing with you when what you're doing is making political points. You know, let Katie Couric make that point. Let John Kerry make that point. Let Dennis Kucinich make that point. Don't send out a widow and say, I have to argue with the widow.
You're perfectly right.
Thank you.
You are perfectly right. We've had it in this country, too. People who lose loved ones in war who are at home grieving, ignored largely. There'll be one person who says, I think he died unnecessarily, and that person's on the front of every newspaper, on every newscast. But once you make yourself a public figure in such a way, the means to do it is the death of a loved one,
yes.
You're then fair game to be criticised. Not unfairly, not rudely, but to be criticised.
Yes, but my point was this whole stream of victims that the Democratic Party would put out to sell their policies. You know, we're going to be getting orphans next to sell health care or tax increases. Can I argue with someone it's okay for me to argue back with, please?
Were you always a conservative?
Yes, although like many young people, I was a little bit more of a libertarian in, you know, a strutting, arrogant libertarian in, I guess, high school, probably up to the beginning of college. Incidentally, I just got an email right after the health care vote last night from one of my very big libertarian friends. One of the big libertarian talking points is, oh, the Republican and the Democratic Party, they're the same, they're both no good. And he emailed me and said, after last night's vote, ich bin ein Republican.
So libertarian, and for those who aren't informed, I suppose, the idea that the less government, the better we are, the ideas of people like Hayek and Road to Freedom and so on, and government is our enemy.
Well, I agree with all of that. The main distinguishing feature that I keep making this point to libertarians in America now is you got to pick a team. There's not going to be a libertarian president of the United States. We are not going to wake up the day after the election on November and find out that a majority of the members of Congress are of the Libertarian Party. There are two major parties in America. I didn't make it that way. I'm describing the facts. All these people act like I'm the one who's responsible for a two-party system. We have a two-party system. You got to pick your poison here. And we had a vote last night that will socialize health care, and I'm sorry, Canada, but you have no place to escape to now. And not one Republican voted for it. Do not tell me there is not a difference between the parties.
Let's talk about faith issues for a moment, because there are different perceptions of Christianity. There are some people, often non-Christians, who believe being a Christian means simply speaking very quietly and occasionally wearing sandals. You're a Christian?
Yes, I am.
And have you ever, in those moments of prayer or reflection, thought, goodness me, I may not have turned the other cheek. I may have offended someone unnecessarily. Is that part of your Christian faith?
Yes, though never for any of my political commentary. There was a computer guy who couldn't fix my computer, and every time I asked him to do something, he'd say, oh, that's going to be a problem. And I was fantasizing about murdering him. And later I thought that was not a Christian sentiment.
You know, I'm going to throw an anecdote in. I'm not going to say who it is, and you will know, but don't mention his name just in case. But he worked very closely in the United States, and he's a Canadian. And this is long before you were to appear on the show. And he also worked with Michael Moore. And he said that you would send flowers to very junior editors at a publisher and phone senior editors and say this person worked very hard and they're terrific, and that Michael Moore tried to get someone fired. And he just said that you are a completely misunderstood character. Do you mind about that?
Do I mind that you've just revealed I'm nice and wrecked my reputation?
Do you mind? I mean, is it a shtick? I mean, we've spent some time together. You're a really nice person, but the persona, some say, oh, it's a persona. She tries to come across as just very hard, harsh, tough, broad. In fact, she's a sweetheart.
You know, I don't think I do try to come across that way at all. I think that's more of what I'm talking about. That is the caricature that's created me. And the example I always use for this, because it's always easier to talk about other people than yourself, is Pat Buchanan, who used to be for many years the co-host of Crossfire. And he is well known as a lovely, kind, funny person. You'd turn on the TV at night. He was often on with Bill Press. And by the way, Bill Press was, the liberal, was oddly enough off camera also a great guy. But as soon as the camera light went on, Bill Press, the liberal, would start frowning and scowling and haranguing you. Whereas the whole time Pat Buchanan was laughing, telling jokes, very amenable. But the media just kept portraying him as angry white men like Pat Buchanan, angry white men like Pat Buchanan. They just say it often enough that people, they won't believe what's in front of their own eyes.
They also, of course, accused him of anti-Semitism, which I think was totally unjust. But that was a way to totally marginalize his opinion.
Yes.
You've been accused of racism, too. You've been accused of anti-Semitism, for goodness sake.
No, I've been, curiously enough, I've been accused of sexism, being anti-Muslim, anti-Semitism, anti-gay. What other groups are there? I've been accused of everything, and I'm not bragging about it because it's just a matter of time. I've never been accused of racism.
I suppose anti-Semitism was somewhat be included in that overall package. Now, you're philo-Semitic, you're extremely pro-Jewish, supportive of Israel, knowledgeable of Judaism. You made a statement which is entirely in keeping with Christian faith. You spoke about Christians being completed Jews.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that is not opposed to any form of genuine Christian theology, but of course people jumped on it to say, oh, you see,
yes, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. I didn't want to respond at the time because it was all done as a publicity stunt by the person interviewing me. And I don't think I'm even going to mention his name to deny him that publicity.
The cruelest cut of all, eh?
But he was this not very bright but very wealthy person who was paying for his own TV time on CNBC. Even paying for his own TV time, his show had to be cut. There were, you could stand on a subway lot and speak really loudly, and more people would hear you than if you went on his show. But he was always nice to me, and it was a fun interview, so what the heck, I agreed to do it again. And it actually took him a long time to get me to agree to do it the first time because it wasn't live. It was live to tape, as they call it, but he had always been fair to me. It was right before the Fox Business Channel was starting. CNBC is a business station, by the way, and he needed a little publicity. So it didn't matter what I said. I could have said good morning, and he would have screamed and said, I'm offended, but I didn't realize that immediately, and when he said he was offended, I thought he had actually misunderstood me. You just asked me if I ever said something I made a mistake on. I totally made a mistake on that. I did not follow my own advice, which is never be nice to liberals, and I was nice to him, and I should not have been, because it is outrageous what he said to me, and simply an indication of his utter and complete ignorance, and the ignorance of the public schools, that anyone wouldn't laugh him. Well, it was laughed off TV, so. But yeah, I mean, it is a fact. The Old Testament goes through in anticipation of the Messiah. They say he hasn't come yet. We say turn the page. There he is. That is a fact of how the Old Testament and the New Testament relate to one another. A Jew who becomes a Christian is completing what is prophesied in the Old Testament. That is a fact. You cannot get around that fact. You cannot say you were offended by a fact of a description of the Bible, but he wanted to get press, and he was on the Today Show, which is a big morning show in America the next day, accusing me of anti-Semitism for giving a complete and accurate description of how the Old and New Testament relate to one another.
Did you have many Jewish colleagues, Jewish friends? Did they come forward to defend you?
Yeah, actually, people I didn't even know. I mean, anyone with half a brain defended me, but there was, among others, a rabbi I did not know about before who leads this enormous group of like 900 other rabbis who was ferociously defending me. And yeah, of course.
Good stuff. There's more to come on the Michael Coren Show with Ann Coulter back in a few moments. Don't you dare go away. Michael Coren Show. Ann Coulter is my guest, an exclusive interview, and there are shows with bigger audiences, of course. Not that many. You'd be surprised. Look at some of the audience sizes. For your publicly funded TV, you'll be amazed. Really? $1 per head to get people to watch that show? Anyway, Anne is only doing this program. I don't think because we promised to be generous or sycophantic, but we promised to be fair, to allow people to speak their mind. I have to say this. I mean, we've had all sorts of people on the show who've said the most outrageous things, and little response has taken place. Universities across this country, there are speakers who say things which are outrageous and profoundly racist. But again, they're on a certain political spectrum, and they're acceptable. Ann Coulter comes to Canada. Before she set foot in the country, there is an academic bureaucrat who says, be careful, you may be charged with a criminal offence. Let's give you a couple more quotes. And again, these may not be genuine.
Excellent, my greatest hits.
My only regret with Timothy McVeigh is he did not go to the New York Times building. Now, what came before that, what came after that, it could be there could be a context. He was the Oklahoma bomber.
I don't even think that needs defense. I think it's quite obvious what I meant by that. But
you don't want liberal journalists on the Times to die.
It would make my life very lonely and sad, wouldn't it? That, by the way, is just I mean, I don't think it needs any defense. You can imagine. I can tell you what it was, but it doesn't matter. I can cite yesterday's New York Times for why that quote makes perfect sense. But that's a quote from 2002.
But Anne, look,
I just want to say that is a quote from 8 years ago.
No, I'm not going to push you on it because, I mean, you should read my Wikipedia entry.
I love the quote. I'm not apologizing for it.
You don't want journalists to... The New York Times is frequently inaccurate. It's horribly one-sided. It sometimes even tells lies. It's hypocritical the way it treated the Kurt Vestergaard's cartoons of Muhammad. But you don't want the journalists who work for the Times to die. No,
I don't want the janitors to die. If you're going to correct that statement, I don't want the secretaries or the editors and the journalists are precisely whom I was talking about. And wait, what I was going to say, they don't, what's clever about the New York Times, as their most loyal reader, they don't lie the way the Bush League newspapers lie, and the Bush League liberals lie, because I obviously cite the New York Times quite a bit and a lot of liberal media in my books. And often I'm expecting to be able to find quotes on a particular topic from the Times, and they lie in a very particular way. They lie by omission. It's not that generally that they will state a fact that is absolutely untrue. It's just that they won't give you all the facts, which is why I keep wanting to write, the New York Times version of Hitler's obituary. It would be, artist dies. And they go through his military history and how he was a frustrated artist. And, someone would read the obituary and say, you didn't mention the Holocaust. Well, did we say anything that wasn't true? You write your own obituary. You don't have to write everything. We have a word limit here. But is anything untrue in this obituary? No, nothing is technically untrue. You just leave out what many people would consider relevant facts.
It's interesting you mentioned the Holocaust, because the Times refused to mention it until very late on, after many other newspapers had referred to it. And the case with the Vestergaard cartoon of Muhammad, and I'll never forget this, was the New York Times, the paper of record in the United States, says, we're not going to print the cartoon because it may be offensive to people.
Right.
And we can convey its meaning in our words. And yet the same week, a picture of the Virgin Mary soaked in urine, they had the picture of the...
Yes, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is a perfect example of how they lie by omission. The famous Virgin Mary exhibit, the Sensation exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, back when Giuliani was mayor, and he was going to deny taxpayer funds for this. Well, I went to the Sensation exhibit and wrote a fantastic review. But the Virgin Mary portrait, I don't think he got the eyes above the mouth, actually. Forget that it was made of elephant dung. That isn't inherently offensive. Clay is clay, whatever you make it out of. No, what was all over the picture of the Virgin Mary were photographic cutouts of women's vulva. Yeah. And the New York Times, every time they describe that Virgin Mary, they describe it as if the only thing offensive about it was that it was a Virgin Mary made out of cow dung. No.
Identifiable groups. Of everything you've written and said, the only group I could imagine this would apply to would be the Muslim community.
Well, I'll give my speech wearing a burqa, then I can say anything. That'll protect me, right?
Have you... I have heard you speak about... I saw you give a speech on YouTube, and I thought it was very well done. And you were talking about profiling. And you described... And we go through this all the time, because you know what the knee-jerk reaction is. Whenever you mention Islamic fundamentalism, people will say, well, there's fundamentalism in all religions. You ask them to name the series of Free Methodists who've blown planes up, but they have some problems. But you listed the past 24 attacks and described the people who committed them. And you said, without commenting on Islam, you simply said this is not racial profiling, it's description of suspect.
Right.
Now, I didn't see anything inaccurate in what you said.
Yes, that's why they scream and call me a racist and holler. And by the way, there are a lot of Muslims who love America and don't want another attack. And they agree with me. They go through airport security and they're not happy about getting on a plane if they haven't been given an extra look. They don't want to die either. Right? I mean, this is just simply common sense, and it isn't to say that racial profiling would be the only way to do it.
It wouldn't be racial either, would it?
No, but you would be looking at some physical characteristics. You'd be looking at the name. You'd be looking at the age. You'd be looking at the gender. But the main point about that is it has been taken off the table. Whatever combination of security measures you're going to go through at airport security and other forms of security, the idea that we are going to take off the table the likely physical characteristics and name characteristics of people coming through, that is madness. It is utter madness. It is Hitler's ultimate triumph. This is the one thing that liberals learned from Hitler. It isn't don't kill people, it's don't discriminate. That's what they learned. So that's why they'll still stick forks in babies' heads in the mother's womb. But, oh, we can't look at Muslims after the 9/11 attack or probable Muslims going through airport security. And by the way, people are now, and I need to write a response to this guy, Leonard Pitts or something, wrote a column saying, ha, this new jihad Jane proves that racial profiling wouldn't have worked. Well, A, as I said, it's not racial profiling alone and you let everybody else breeze through, but yeah, you give an extra little look, and it doesn't have to be done in an unkind way, the way, say, airport security treats me. It can be done in a nice way. You just have fewer people, and a lot of them won't even be Muslims or Arabs, but they will be within, you know, the basic profile. It won't be, you know, an elderly southern black man from Mississippi. I think I could exclude him pretty quickly. But, you know, he'll still go through something. Point one, it's just that this should be part of the entire panoply of security measures. But point two, as I said when I was often asked that in speeches after 9/11, you know, what about, why can't they recruit white women to do their bidding? And as I correctly predicted, they could only recruit white women, you know, off the green room of the Jerry Springer show. and if you're going that far down, they probably won't be bright enough to pull it off. And look at these two jihad Janes in America. They were caught. They're posting it on Facebook. The FBI has been following them since the first Facebook saying, I'd like to kill the Dutch artist.
So in other words, you're asking for a very, very pale imitation of what so many Arab countries do. If you want to go to them, have you ever visited the Zionist entity, your religion? You can't go to Mecca if you're not a Muslim. So we would never act like that. That is racist. That is profile. So you're not asking for what they do. It's just a sensible response to what a terrorist may be.
Yes, and in particular, not taking that off the table. I mean, if you went to a Martian and described, you know, what happened on 9/11, they'd say to you, okay, well, this is tough because you weren't attacked by a single country, so you don't really know who to go after. They're coming and pretending to be tourists or immigrants here. They're mingling and acting like regular citizens. So, you know, you got everything going against you. The one thing you have in your favor is they all look alike. Half of them are named Muhammad. That's your one advantage. You know, if the Martians said that to the room of assembled security experts, they'd all, oh, yeah, let's call an adjournment to the meeting right now. Why is that? Because that is the only thing liberals learned from Hitler: do not discriminate, do not kill.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is the ethnic discrimination. First you have ethnic discrimination, picking out people on the basis of being Jewish, and then they get killed. What conservatives learned was don't kill people. What liberals learned is don't ever discriminate. And you're discriminating. Of course you're discriminating. If you're looking for probable Islamic terrorists, you're going to look like someone, really look for someone who could be an Islamic terrorist. That's my thinking on this.
Two more questions in particular I want to ask. When we return, we will, if we're allowed. Don't go away. Do not. Welcome back. Michael Coren Show, last segment with Ann Coulter, who's speaking 3 times in Canada, as long as they do allow her, and not being facetious. There are people who believe she should not be allowed into the country. The same people, by the way, it seems, who campaigned so aggressively for George Galloway, the British parliamentarian, to be brought into Canada. Funny old world, innit? Because you mentioned in the last segment and the one before the Holocaust and Hitler applying to liberals. There were all sorts of liberal people who fought Nazism and Hitlerism and died doing so. Most liberal-minded people would despise what Hitler stood for. Just to use the analogy or the metaphor, you can understand how offensive that would be.
What I just said?
Yeah. You could condemn them without mentioning Hitler. You said we learned from Hitler not to kill.
No,
they learned from Hitler not to discriminate.
I think I'm stating an historical fact. It is peculiar, more than at any time in world history, this aversion to distinguishing. I mean, it's always considered discrimination as a bad thing. Discrimination can be a good thing, but to even identify characteristics. Well, what you were just saying during the break, when you travel to Ireland, they'd find out if you were Catholic. They'd ask you how many siblings you have.
They did, yeah.
Okay, you couldn't do that today.
Years ago.
That is a beautiful example. Now, why couldn't you do that? Because what liberals learned from the Holocaust is don't discriminate. Don't think that, oh, Irish Catholics would have more children. No, that's discriminatory. That's bad. Now, that's peculiar. Michael, I'm sorry, that is peculiar. This is what liberals learned from the Holocaust. Don't discriminate, as opposed to don't kill people.
It's not even learned. They've come to this conclusion because they're so terrified of asking the valid questions. I don't think it has anything to do with learning from Hitler.
I don't think it ever happened before World War II. It never happened. It is post-World War II. It is an historical fact that that's when people froze up at noticing different characteristics among ethnic groups. Well, you know, I mean, obviously, I think you should be kind to people, unless they don't deserve it. I mean, discriminating or noticing a difference among people is not an inherently bad thing to do. I mean, my bodyguard and I come from New York. You have one ethnic group living on top of the other ethnic group. It's one of the most free places to talk about distinctions among ethnic groups, because we're all living on top of one another. And there are differences in the Italians and the Irish and the Dominicans and the Puerto Ricans and the Jews and who else? There are ethnic differences, and everyone talks about it and jokes about it all the time. If you move that out to, I think, many parts of even America, the world, Canada, I think it would seem shocking to liberals, and that is because there is this morbid obsession among liberals with any sort of racial or ethnic distinction. Well, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I mean, it's bad if you're using it to enslave people. It's bad if you're using it to discriminate against people or not hire people or exclude people. But simply the fact of ethnic differences is certainly not offensive, and when it comes in handy, as it might, say, for airport security after 9/11, to so freakishly object to what ought to be a crucial component of security in America after 9/11, that is a psychological block. And I don't think you ever saw that in the world until Nazi Germany.
90 seconds. This is a really awful thing to do. 90 seconds. Barack Obama, peace be upon him. And I'm constantly criticized for always saying Barack Obama, peace be upon him, but I'm keeping it. It's mine. Is he a great president?
I guess the one way he could achieve greatness, and after last night's vote, it's very well possible, is he could bring in the most massive right-wing regime in America that we've seen since Ronald Reagan. I mean,